Hello, and welcome to the Earth Chats podcast. I'm your host, Sahara. I'm an activist, writer, speaker, and listener with a passion for creating change in our world. Join me and special guests weekly as we have inspiring conversations and reveal insightful knowledge, tips, and tricks on how you can live more mindfully on this planet. Tune in every Wednesday and make sure to hit subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest episodes. And now, without further ado, let's get on with the episode. As a special gift to our listeners, BMDM Digital has created a 52-page free social media training guide that will help you ignite your social media. You can download your free copy in the link below. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today we have a very special guest with us, somebody that has been a very great mentor to me in all of my growing and learning on different aspects of nature, and who's very much inspired me. And I've been trying to get her on the podcast for a while now, but she's such a busy lady that it took lockdown to lock her up inside to finally get her on the podcast. So everybody, welcome the lovely Sue Swain to the podcast. Welcome, Sue.
Thanks so much, Sahara, and hi, all the listeners out there. And thanks very much for the invite to do this. I really appreciate it and look forward to our chatting together.
Yes, I think this is going to be a very good one. You've got lots of interesting knowledge for us to listen to and for you to share. But before we get into that, we're going to ask Sue her favorite question. And that is, Sue, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself so that we know about the person behind the voice talking today?
Okay, sure. Well, first off, I am a bit of an introvert, which is why I always find that question rather daunting. But I really was Port Elizabeth born and bred, and then went and studied conservation in Cape Town at what was then called the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, CPUT. And so studied conservation and worked in the conservation arena for many years, mostly in the line of environmental education, which is really my passion. And on a more personal note, I love being outdoors. I love music and theatre and movies, reading a good book, going for hikes, and especially spending time with my furry family.
Yes. You know, we actually got a new addition to our furry family. We got a puppy yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Yes. She's tiny and adorable.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting experience. She loves sleeping in my sister's bed, and she's so sweet. So very nice addition to the family. The other dogs all love her. The cat loves her.
Oh.
She has not met the chickens or the goats yet, but we'll see how that goes.
I'm sure that will be quite something.
Yes.
There's nothing like a puppy in a home.
Yes, right. So let's get right into it. Now, Sue, you do an array of different things. But one of your main focuses is biomimicry. Could you please explain to those of us that do not know what biomimicry is, what it is, and what it entails?
Sure. Look, biomimicry really is a combination of words. It comes from the Greek word bios, meaning life, and mimicry, obviously, to copy or emulate. Yeah. And so that really is what it's about, is learning from life. It often gets described as learning from nature's models, processes, and systems to solve our human design and sustainability challenges. But I kind of prefer to focus on the word life, learning from life, because often when we say learning from nature, we kind of communicate with that man is somehow separate from nature, that nature is something different from us, but we're really part of nature, which is why I prefer the word life. But in learning from life's models, processes, and systems, it's really a fascinating field, and it's a new thing that has emerged in terms of being a actual design methodology, but it's an ancient practice. All indigenous cultures effectively practice biomimicry right from the word go, working closely with nature, learning from nature, and really living like nature. And I think that that's a part of biomimicry that really excites me more, is when we start learning from the systems. But I think maybe some examples would help people to understand a little more, because it can be done on various levels. So I don't know, would some examples work?
Yes, please give us some examples. Hit us with them.
Hit you with them. Okay, well, I think one of the most classic examples is that of the Shinkansen bullet train in Japan, which is that the high-speed train travel at 320 kilometers per hour. But the problem with that is the train had a rounded nose cone, which actually pushes air in front of it. And they discovered that when the train entered and then exited a tunnel, the differences in air densities caused a massive sonic boom, a loud sound explosion, which obviously was a problem in populated Japan. And they turned to the engineers and said, "We've got a problem. We need you to please solve this." And the one engineer happened to be an instinctive biomimic. And he said to himself, well, what in nature faces those same kind of challenges, the differences in densities, air densities? And I don't know if you can guess, but he came up with a kingfisher that dives through air into water. So you can obviously imagine the different densities there. But there's some fantastic photographs out there where you actually see where the kingfisher's beak is already in the water and there's not so much as a ripple. He's catching fish. He can't afford for there to be a ripple or a splash. By the time the wings hit and there is a splash, his beak has already speared the fish. So they simply then redesigned the front nose cone to match the shape of the kingfisher beak, which meant that the train now slices through air as opposed to pushing it in front of it. And they discovered that not only was sonic boom a thing of the past, but there was 15% less electricity required to run the train. It was 10% quieter and 10% faster overall. So that's an example of learning from nature's models to solve a design challenge. But it's fairly shallow biomimicry, that, because the train is still running on diesel or coal-fired electricity or whatever, and you consider that a kingfisher basically self-assembles its own beak while it grows. You start to understand that there's a big difference in how we manufacture and develop models as to how nature does it.
Yeah, for sure. But thank you for sharing that. It definitely helps to get a bit of a image in your mind. And for those of you that are still confused, I highly recommend just searching biomimicry or going onto Sue's website. I'll leave the links in the description below so you can go and check that out. Now, I'm curious because you've set up your own organization called BioWise. You work as an environmentalist with a focus on biomimicry, but you've also started other projects such as Waste Nothing Nice Now. And I know that your care for the planet extends way beyond just your profession. But so I'd love to hear, where this journey kind of started for you. Like growing up, were you always very aware of nature? Were you like the nature kid? And where that kind of love for the planet came from, and then also what your sort of light bulb moment was that drew you to biomimicry.
Yeah, I think I was brought up in a home that where animals were, a full-on part of life, and being a lot lamaki, I was also a lot of the time on my own, and I think just learned immediately to really connect closely with the animals. At one stage, my mom was helping to set up the animal welfare in Port Elizabeth. And while they were still trying to build all the kennels and enclosures and that, we ended up having 84 cats at home.
Oh
So
my gosh.
that was quite something. I don't think it was quite as challenging as the lady who decided she'd take on all the dogs while that was happening. So
Oh
they also
wow.
had about 80 dogs at home. But yeah, so I think it was just learned from a very early age to actually really connect with animals. And but in terms of biomimicry, I think my real light bulb moment came when I started to actually teach about nature. I mean, I'd studied conservation, gone into environmental education, and throughout for instance, throughout your life in learning biology at school and all of that. I mean, we learned, for instance, about the process of photosynthesis. And yes, you could learn it like a parrot quote, the 15, steps backwards, etc. But it was only when I actually started to have to teach it that I realized what an incredible process it is. It's the reason why there's life on Earth, and that there has to be a different way of explaining things. But also that it suddenly dawned on me that maybe we should shift from learning about nature to really what could we learn from that. And so that was my real light bulb moment. I didn't know the term biomimicry because I'm talking about that happening to me way back in about 1992, which is before you were born. But and I actually only learnt of the term biomimicry in 2006 when I actually picked up the amazing book called Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature by Janine Benyus, who really coined the phrase and is known as the biomimicry guru. So that was the real shift for me, I think, was, understanding maybe there's so much more to it than just learning about nature. Sure, we can know that a tree has this kind of leaf shape and lives to that age and all of that, but why? Why does it have that leaf shape? And what could we learn from it? Yeah, so I think that was really my light bulb moment.
So true, because I think, it's so kind of, like you said, a learning about nature or learning about how it works. It very much separates us from nature and makes us feel that, it's humans and nature, even though it very much isn't. We all are a part of the great circle of life. And I think that's what I really loved about, because obviously, so let me give a bit of backstory here. My mom and Sue used to work together because my mom also studied conservation, and my mom's a yoga teacher now, but before she was doing her yoga teaching, she was working more in the field of conservation. Unfortunately, she had to, earn money and look after her kids, so she had to drop that for a bit. But my mom and Sue worked together for a while, so I've known Sue for quite a long time, actually. She's known me for a long time, since I was a little kid. And then when I went to the Green Pop Festival in 2018, I think it was, Sue was doing a talk on biomimicry. And I remember listening to this talk and being utterly astounded, completely amazed. I was 100% absorbed, because it was every single thought that I'd ever thought in my mind about how the world operated and how we operate within the world and with the world was she was speaking those words, and it made so much sense. And I think how you talk very much about us all being, all part of one circular whole is something that I really connected with. And so I'd actually love to talk about that a little bit, because you talk a lot about connecting people back to nature and connecting people to nature, and then also connecting people to themselves. So I'd just be curious, what does this mean to you? What does the concept connecting to nature mean to you?
Well, actually, I'm not sure of that preposition. I actually think I prefer the connecting with, because I think that really implies a stronger connection as such. And yeah, for me, it's really, spending time in nature, but where you are really consulting, asking questions, listening to the answers, obviously it means, getting outdoors and spending time. And I think, yeah, for me, it's also about tapping into inner knowing, into the intuition, because connecting with nature is as much about connecting with yourself as it is with the outside world. And so I think those are the important things for me, is really that allowing that intuition and that what we're actually genetically wired to get to come through. And to really also start to question, what is this planet, and how does it work, and how can I become a contributing player in this fantastic web of life. So yeah, that's really what connecting with nature means to me.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's true, actually. Just like the little change up of the words, instead of to, and you change it to with, it definitely does change it actually a lot. And that's what I like. It's like you always think about things in like a slightly different way, and that's what I really like about your perception.
Thanks, my Angel. Yeah, look, it's I think maybe being an introvert really does help, because you are okay in your own company, and it does give you the time to really just think about things and think differently.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you feel that people have disconnected from the planet, and how has our modern day lives and society contributed to this?
Sure. I think it's come quite a long way. We haven't always been disconnected with nature, that's for sure. We know the sand people are kind of like the earliest biomimics. But they say it's really been a journey of moving away from nature. Kind of started way back about 10,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution, when we're no longer limited then to hunter-gathering, but we could learn to grow our own food and stock our own pantries, as it were. And I think, that led to us having more time on our hands to do other things. And they've also linked that very much then with population growth. That's when the population started to take off. And that was then followed also by what was called the scientific revolution. And this is where we really started the big disconnect with nature, started to see ourselves as different from nature. Because up until that time, kind of, it really, we'd still considered it, the earth, like Mother Nature, and that the earth was our mother. And in the scientific revolution time, it was Francis Bacon's time. And I mean, he started the concept of, torturing nature for her secrets. Those were literally his words. And that then also led to the Industrial Revolution, where we started to tap into fossil fuels. And so we could now develop machines that could dig deeper, further, and faster into the earth. Up until then, the kind of any digging and damage, if you wanted to call it, that had been done by our muscle power. So the earth could actually regenerate in that time. But with machines and that, it really started to make that our impact would start to be felt really strongly. And then that progressed like to the petrochemical revolution, where we also moved away from nature's chemistry into our own. We could now tap into all 117 elements in the chemical periodic table and started to force them into combinations by putting them under extreme temperature and extreme pressure, which came from the use of fossil fuels. And then we've gone to the genetic engineering revolution, the IT revolution. It's all just systematically taken us on a journey of separating ourselves from nature. And I think, yes, as we've all experienced maybe with lockdown and WhatsApps, and how we are able to connect around the world. But I think also even within that, there's a huge difference between having contact and making connection with. And I think that's also what we've started to lose is real connections with. We've got a lot of contact, but not real meaningful connection. So yeah, I think that's really what it's been is this journey of separating ourselves from. But I do think we've been given the opportunity through this COVID-19 to rethink what is actually really important, to revalue, that the ability of just getting out and spending time in nature, the privilege of being able to walk in a forest or walk on the beach, and to actually start feeling what it is that we really need. We are of this earth. We're not a species that has come from outer space. We're made up of exactly the same materials and chemical elements that every living organism out there is. I think Chief Seattle said it so beautifully, is, where would man be without the beasts? He would suffer from a great loneliness of spirit. And I think that is actually what we are experiencing now, is this incredible loneliness, which is why we're so obsessed with social media and making this contact and all of that, but it's actually not producing kind of like the meaning that we really need and seek. Yeah.
I love that. I love what you said about the contact versus the connection, because that is so true. I think people have, so many quote unquote friends and people that they talk to and contacts and stuff, but how many of these people are actually real friends in your real life, and how many of these people do you actually have a connection to? And the same goes, like you said, for our planet, like we are absorbed with all this contact, but not enough of the connection. And I mean, with this lockdown, it's been amazing because obviously, we can't go anywhere, so we're just here on the farm, and like the whole family has I feel the whole family has connected more. We've been all like working out in the garden together, and like my uncle's a tree surgeon, so we've been taking down like some of the old trees. We've all been like dragging the branches out, and we've been, making new garden beds, and it's been such a very humbling experience. So I think it's definitely, as much as it's, it's horrible what's happening at the moment, I think it was also, in a way, it's been actually quite a special time. Of course, for those of us that are privileged to have space around us and family around us, and, it's very different if you're just completely isolated by yourself. But I think we definitely have a lot to learn from this time.
Absolutely. And I would hope that is what has been experienced by the majority of people, that the real meaning of quality family time together and doing things, and where the emphasis is more on being than having. Yes. I think, that's really, really so important.
100%.
Yeah.
So before we chat a little bit more, I just want to actually jump back a bit and ask you a little bit about the whole waste nothing concept, because that's something else you work with a lot. You've started something called Waste Nothing Naisna, and you talk a lot about, not producing waste and seeing waste as a resource, and basically not creating waste, because nature does not create waste. So could you expand a little bit on that concept? And also, how do you think that people could start implementing something like circular economy on a small scale in order to start creating change? Because obviously, the moment you start looking at like big systems and big scale, it's quite daunting. But if we could start, small, creating these small systems within our smaller communities, then hopefully that will grow out by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've really hit the nail on the head. And just also, taking a step back there is explaining that, biomimicry is as much learning from nature's systems as it is from nature's models. And in the systems, there are strategies, processes, and principles being applied. and that we really need to take on board, because what we need to understand is that plants, animals, and microbes have been getting this right for 3.8 billion years. So they truly are our planetary elders who need to be our mentors and the measure by which we look at how we are doing things, you know, because we're seriously toddlers in this whole, you know, planetary development. And I think, you know, the beauty of biomimicry is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The solutions are out there. They are time-tested, proven. That's what we need to tap into. So that's really where the whole waste nothing concept came from, because if you look at a forest and, you know, you really just take time to sit down and think of it as a system, as opposed to just seeing, you know, individual frogs and birds and trees and things like that, but thinking of it as a system and how it functions. There is no waste, and it also makes sense, because we need to almost take a step back to really understand what this planet is, what this fantastic home is that we live on, that we're privileged enough to call our home. But we need to understand that it is it's a closed system planet. Effectively, that means that there are no imports and there are no exports. So, you know, what we have is what we've got. And if there are no exports, there's also no throwaway. So, you know, we can't just toss things out. So you've got to make sure that you have a sensible response to that planetary condition. And nature's response has been to ensure that every bit of waste produced is food or nutrient for something else. It's as simple as that. And so if you look at a forest, you see that there's no waste, there's no polluting, there's no poisoning of the system. And importantly, critically importantly, there's no unemployment. Every organism is gainfully employed, meeting their own needs. But the critical thing is they're not only meeting their own needs, they're contributing to meeting the needs of the system. The system needs nutrients and waste to be upcycled, reused, etc. And there are a whole number of organisms busy, you know, involved in doing that. So that's really where the whole waste nothing concept came, where it's understanding that waste nothing is about not wasting any of the resources we have, but also then turning all waste that we produce into a resource. So that's really important, understanding, because often waste, when we speak about waste and zero waste, we talk about, you know, producing no waste, but waste is a fact of life. There are, or byproducts of metabolism is another way of looking at waste. It's a fact of life, but how do we make sure that ultimately all the nutrients, the resources can actually be repurposed, recycled, and reused ultimately? Because again, it's a closed system. There are no imports, so we have to make use of what we've got and ensure we're continually regenerating it. So with waste nothing, it was looking at not only traditionally what we think of as waste, as in what we throw into a rubbish bin, but also other resource sources like water and energy, and even space and time. All of those are resources, and how do we not waste any of that and turn waste of it into a resource? So even waste energy, how do you take heat that is escaping from your oven and actually maybe pipe it into your hot water cylinder so that you actually can heat up your hot water cylinder with waste heat from when you do cooking, you know, simple things like that. But if we traditionally also then look at waste as in materials, it's how do we use the very least amount of what we need to use, and then make sure that any waste from that is reused again. So if you look at what you could be doing at home, for instance, I think really importantly, and this does come, a lot of it was inspired by the zero waste movement. and that is to we often think the first thing that people mention is recycling, but recycling itself costs huge amounts of energy, huge amount of resources. I mean, you take newspaper, you take magazines, and you think of all the inks and that have gone into the production of that magazine. And now we want to recycle that. Can you imagine what the water must look like that has had to soak off all of those inks? And that, it produces hectically polluted water. And so recycling really is not the primary solution. The first thing is that we need to try and refuse to produce waste in the first place, radically reduce the waste that we do produce, and then reuse, repair, repurpose as much as possible before we send for recycling. Because the reality is that recycling is done on an economy of scale. So you find that it's always volumes driven. So in small places like Plettenberg Bay and Knysna and all of that, we don't do any recycling ourselves. We collect and separate and then actually have to send it to Cape Town or Joburg for the actual recycling. So you can imagine, all the transport costs resulting in that. And then quite often the stuff is not actually recycled back into what it was. It's actually downcycled. So plastic bottles are generally not made into plastic bottles again, but they're made into plastic piping or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but maybe you've got, just in those talking points, you've got some further questions you might want to ask and redirect the conversation.
No, I think it's great what you've given us, because it's true. A lot of people think ultimately recycling is the answer to all their problems, but it's not. And the thing is with recycling is, again, it can only be recycled so many times before it's going to end up as waste again,
Yeah, exactly.
So no, that's great.
Yeah, and I think, just also, if we look at water, for instance, if you look at a forest and how a forest functions, and if you think that the main components of a forest are plants, trees, shrubs, etc., you need to ask yourself, so they rely on rainfall to come. So is the system designed to then run that any stormwater runoff as quickly away from the forest as possible? Or is it designed to rather slow spread and sink the water to keep it on site for as long as possible? And then you compare that to how we function in our towns with our stormwater systems and all of that. We consider, rain runoff and stormwater nuisance. We try and get it away as quickly as possible. So the lessons from a forest would be to say, no, guys, we need to be slow spreading and sinking that water where it lands. And, so to start thinking differently in terms of that, going outside and seeing what happens when it rains and seeing how much of the water is running off and what can we do in our homes to actually prevent that, to keep it on site. So obviously there's rainwater harvesting with rainwater tanks and things like that, which you can then actually start meeting your own needs for water, which makes you more naturally efficient with water. But it's also looking at more at other things where there's runoff from your driveway and things like that. How do we rather redirect that into the gardens, create rain gardens, so that we're actually planting the rain? That is such a beautiful term. As in the research I've done, I understand it comes from a Zimbabwean farmer who first mentioned that concept of planting the rain. Just like we plant seeds in the ground, that's what we need to be doing with rain. And then it will slowly filter into our rivers. But really we need it into the landscape, recharging the groundwater, etc. So if you wanting to know, okay, so that's how I can deal with water and be waste wise and waste nothing, so not wasting a drop of rain that falls, as well as not wasting a drop of water that comes out of our taps and that. So it's really asking ourselves to think a bit beyond what we may traditionally, think of if we speak about wasting nothing.
100%, 110%. I agree with everything you just said. It's so true. I'm quickly interrupting this episode to bring you a little message from our amazing sponsors who've made this episode possible. I live in the beautiful town of Knysna in the Garden Route, and I want to invite everyone to visit this fantastic part of our country. We have everything: indigenous forests, nature reserves, awesome views, beautiful beaches, and natural wildlife. Come for a dream vacation. Oh, and I almost forgot. Knysna has some of the best restaurants you will find anywhere. Follow us on Instagram at @visitgardenroute, where we will introduce you to our fantastic and favorite people, places, and things to visit. This is us on Instagram at visitgardenroute. And now, without further ado, let's get on with the rest of the episode.
And Sahara, that links so closely to what you did in starting What the Bag as well, is to rather look at reusing and repurposing.
Well, that was the whole concept behind it, was the waste nothing, and you very much inspired that whole idea, so thank you.
Well, thank you for taking it up and producing such an awesome concept out of it. I think that's really what it needs to be. This is really what interconnecting and connecting is all about, is learning from each other and building on things. This is how nature does it. It evolves solutions over time. It doesn't invent it overnight. And and I think the beauty of is there is so much. The beauty of social media is that we can really learn about fantastic things happening elsewhere around the world and start applying them. But obviously, I think what's really important is to understand that nature is very much attuned and responsive, or rather locally attuned and responsive. So anything that we learn about that's happening out there, we've also got to realize it's going to be applied in a local context. And how do we do that effectively? I think is really important. And also, you mentioned the circular economy, which is great. I mean, nature operates in cycles, and that's really what we need to start thinking about. And they're going to be stepping stones along the way, I think, of getting ourselves really to where we need to be. The reality is we have tapped into resources that have never been tapped into for 3.8 billion years with our machinery and our equipment, and we have forced chemical combinations that have produced products that aren't recognized by the organisms out there, so they can't break them down, assimilate them, and turn them into resources, which is what happens in nature. So we talk about having two different kind of cycles that we need to tap into, and they're technological cycles and then they're biological cycles. So the technological cycles is where we try and keep the products that are not great, like the plastic that we have produced, and endlessly cycle that within a technological cycle. So continually finding ways to repurpose that plastic. So, I mean, we know that plastic PET bottles can be turned actually into fleecy garments, but then we need to be able to take those fleecy garments at the end of their life and restrip them down and use them to produce some other kind of plastic-based product. So that it doesn't end up, ever being actual real waste that just goes and pollutes and poisons and threatens the existence of life out there. And then obviously your biological cycles is where we get closer to how nature works, and that is where waste truly is food, as in nutrient for things. So a simple example is is turning our food waste into compost. But what is compost? We're actually building soil. That's what you're doing. And that's when we start saying, okay, so now we're actually functioning like a species that really belongs on this planet, that understands we need to actually be putting back, giving back. It's not only about not taking more than what we should be using, but it's about continually restoring and putting back and regenerating. And I think where things are going to get exciting also in the field of biomimicry is when we start to understand the natural cycles that nature taps into and contributes to. And the carbon cycle is one of the big ones. We all have heard about climate change and, the dangers of too much CO2 in the atmosphere. But the reality is nature has always used CO2 as a feedstock, a building block. You consider how trees grow, they take in carbon dioxide, they split off the carbon becomes part of the body of the tree, and pure oxygen is given off as a waste product, which is really interesting. So the very air that we breathe and need, and the majority of living species on this planet need, is effectively a waste product. So isn't that awesome, to think of? But I think, sorry, I'm jumping a little bit all over the place, but
don't worry.
With the CO2, for instance, with cement making, for every ton of cement produced, a ton of CO2 is released into the atmosphere, which is, problematic. Although CO2 is a very valuable gas, we need it. It's what warms our planet. If there's too much of it, it makes us too hot, and we can't just kick it off like a duvet that we get too hot in the night. So we really need to understand that for billions of years, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is around about 0.03% of the atmosphere, and that's what it needs to be balanced at. And that's what nature is so good at doing. It takes in CO2, but it also releases CO2, but it does it in a balance. But back to the cement making, is that this guy then thought, but actually, okay, so cement, we use limestone as the base. But limestone is the ancient bodies of coral reefs. How do coral reefs actually grow? And could we not mimic that recipe? And basically, coral reefs start out as little polyps that release a molecule that attract the dissolved CO2 in the salt sea water to produce the limestone base through a chemical reaction. And that's now what they're doing. They're taking CO2 and they're bubbling it through salt sea water to produce the cement base. So now we're starting to use CO2 as a feedstock. And what's more abundantly available than CO2 in the atmosphere? So now that starts to get clever. The only thing is, thinking about the cement is also thinking, okay, but then maybe the cement needs to be porous so that when rain falls, it can actually still go through and recharge groundwater and things like that. So there's a lot more complexity to things than producing products in isolation. We've got to start thinking in systems. I think that's really, really important. Start connecting the dots and all of that. It's an exciting part of biomimicry when we start to now understand that let's start mimicking the natural processes. I mean, imagine, we've got things like 3D printing, which is really starting to build things more like nature does. Nature builds from the bottom up, which results in 96% product and only 4% waste. We tend to carve from the top down. So we produce a huge slab of something and then we carve it out and we result in about 4% product and 96% waste. But with 3D printing, we're starting to just, you're literally building from the bottom up. So you only use the material that is needed because you've got the blueprint is there, and you only use what is needed to produce the actual product. But the problem is we're still using all sorts of toxical raw materials. Toxical. Oh, that is a very interesting one. toxic
Yeah.
materials.
No.
But imagine if we could now take in CO2 into our
Yeah.
3D printers, split off the carbon that is then used to produce the actual product that we're going to 3D print, and pure oxygen is given off as a byproduct. You know, these are the kind of things and the processes that we could start looking at. But that's for the potential scientists and engineers and architects who are listening.
Yes,
We'll
you
also get
gotta
back
you gotta start becoming an inventor and inventing a bunch of cool stuff for us.
That's definitely not my forte. My forte is more the systems side of things.
You've got the wild ideas at least.
I've got the wild ideas. I need the engineers to be able to translate that back into things. And look, nothing is pie in the sky. All of these ideas are actually, you know, already kind of being out there or being thought about. So we really just need to absolutely commit to that. But, you know, I think importantly is bringing it back home and saying, okay, but how do I apply biomimicry then in my home? How do I learn from nature and apply nature's principles and strategies in how I live my life? And that's really where my nonprofit BioWise and where my passion lies in helping people to translate it into the everyday practice, basically.
For sure, it's so important that we can actually be able to do things in the everyday ourselves, because otherwise we're never actually really going to create any change.
Absolutely.
So, are you ready for a quick fire rapid round, if that is possible?
I'm not too sure. Yeah, I'll try and keep it short and sweet.
Try and keep it short and sweet. See if you can do that. No, but honestly, it's been great to have you on the show, and I've loved hearing you talk. It's been ages since we've talked, so it's been good.
Yeah, it has been.
Right.
Thank you. Yes.
What does the typical day in the life of Sue Swain look like? And let's do pre-lockdown and then during lockdown.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, pre-lockdown, there was never really a typical day, but it would start really early, like 5 o'clock, get up, do some computer work, research, whatever, then take animals for a walk, and then back to work. So definitely it was a little bit all work, no play, not enough time. I think I am lucky in living on a farm that I always do have that connection with nature. Even when I'm working, I can look up and look out and see things happening. But still, it was a little bit too much work. Lockdown has been wonderful in making me just reassess also that even though I might be doing what I think is, believe is important work in trying to bring about the changes that I think are necessary, I also need to actually really just take time out and to find more balance in between work and spending time in nature, having quality time with even if it is just my furry family, but also with friends, really picking up the phone and having long, decent chats with them in the evenings, which has been wonderful, and also just relaxing a bit, and exercise is really important too, in whatever manner or form. So I think that's going forward what I would like my typical day to be, to contain elements of everything from work to exercise to a bit of music and dancing and getting out into nature with my animals. Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Yes. I think that's something I've also definitely been learning as well, is to have a little bit more balance and harmony between work and play. Right. What is one of the biggest lessons you've learned, and it doesn't have to be career related?
Difficult for me to not have a career related. It's not so much career as just what is my.
It can be, but it doesn't have to be.
I think for me the biggest lesson or realization was that there is so much more to nature and to life on Earth than meets the eye, and it has opened up a world of opportunity and insight and new valuing that has just been extraordinary.
on the top of your head, what are 3 things you're grateful for in this moment?
Where I live, my health, and my friends and family, both human and non-human.
Yes. And what piece of advice or actionable step can you give our listeners to help them reduce their impacts on the planet?
Okay.
Try to keep it short and sweet.
Yeah, okay. It's not so much maybe about reducing our impact, as in having a positive impact, but
I meant negative impact.
Yeah. The biggest thing I would say is seal off your rubbish bin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, repurpose it into a compost bin or whatever, because once you take that step and realize that there is no such thing as waste, it's not waste until it's wasted, it will really change your focus. It will change how you start buying, what you buy, how you deal with that waste. So yeah, no rubbish bin. There's no such thing in nature.
Yes, I like it. Good. Oh, this is the big question that everybody always gets scared about and everybody has to think hard about. If we had one day to save the planet, what 3 things would we need to do?
Okay, well, I think it's less about saving the planet. The planet is going to survive. It's more about saving ourselves.
Saving ourselves, yes.
Yeah, and yes, there are something that we could do within a day, and that is change mindsets. I think old Einstein hit it on the head. He said we cannot solve the challenges we're facing with the same level of thinking that created it. And our mindset is what determines our actions. So 3 things from my side would be to, as of today, change your focus from having stuff, to being, rather living and having experiences, number 1. Mm-hmm. Number 2 would be to commit absolutely to localization. Okay, sourcing and keeping things as close to home. So starting, right, what can I, produce here at home, to what do I need further afield, and making sure you're supporting local as much as possible. And the third is to shift from the thinking from sustainable to regenerative. Sustainable is a lot about reducing or limiting our negative impact, to how can we become a contributing player in the web of life. I think that's absolutely critical. If we're going to have a future as a species, we need to become a regenerative one.
100%. I love those 3 things. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Pleasure.
Okay. So to leave off, where can people find BioWise and follow all the interesting work you do?
Okay, there's our website, which will really give you more background into biomimicry and things like that. So that's biowise.org.za. Facebook is a better one to go on if you want to get an idea of where the current thinking is, and I share a lot of posts in terms of what we could be doing and how we could be doing it. And that's also facebook.com/biowise.org.za, and then there's also our Waste Nothing Neisner Facebook page. And then I've also progressed to Instagram, which
you have.
I have. It's a bit new to me, and
I didn't know. Give me the handle.
The handle is planetpartner_Sue.
I'm following now.
It's interesting because I've joined up with a company called Village and Life after bumping into the chairman in the forest up at Pazula, and they've brought me on board to bring biomimicry into the running of their hotels and into the experiences they offer. So it's incredibly exciting. And that Instagram is kind of like following the journey that I'm taking with them in that.
Wonderful. I found it. I followed.
Great.
Cool. Well, thank you. Well, I will leave all the links for that in the description, so people
Okay,
can go
great.
and follow and check everything out and like and share. Make sure you do all that good stuff. And thank you very much for coming on the show today and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you, Sahara. It's been great catching up with you and chatting, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Cool. Sue, I will see you hopefully whenever lockdown ends.
Super. I look forward to it.
Enjoying the show? Then please support us so that we can continue making awesome episodes just for you. A minimum donation of 100 Rand will get you or your business listed on the Earth Chats page as a sponsor with a link to you or your business. Please visit the link below to make your contribution. Thank you for tuning in to the Earth Chats podcast and supporting the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you feel someone else could maybe benefit from hearing this conscious conversation, please do give it a share. And that's it for now, guys. I'll see you next week.